My name is Audrey, and I came into this world as an afterthought, born to parents who were already in their late 60s and had a successful 42-year-old daughter they considered more than enough. We never planned on having you, my mother Diana would often say during our video calls, not with malice but with a matter-of-fact tone that somehow made it worse. If it wasn't for your grandparents. She'd trail off, leaving the implications hanging in the digital silence between us. The unspoken truth was clear. I existed because my maternal grandparents had convinced my reluctant parents to have another child. Victoria, my sister, was already deep into her real estate career when I arrived. She wasn't cruel, she simply acted as if I didn't exist in our spacious suburban home. While I played with my tablet in the corner of our shared living room, she'd be sprawled on the designer couch, making endless calls about property listings and market trends, completely oblivious to my presence. "Victoria, honey, don't forget your open house materials," Mom would say, carefully arranging her premium marketing folders. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting at the kitchen table, struggling with my math homework, but help rarely came. Instead, they developed a routine that defined my entire childhood. Every morning, they'd drop me off at my grandparents' modest but welcoming ranch house. "You wanted her," my father Kenneth would say to my grandfather, car keys dangling from his fingers as he checked his smartwatch, already running late for his consulting job. "She's all yours." My grandparents' house became my real home. They picked me up from school in their reliable old Volvo, helped me with my homework at their well-worn kitchen table, took me to the neighborhood park with its creaking swings, and made sure I was fed and cared for. Only late at night would my parents come to collect me, usually looking exhausted and slightly annoyed at having to make the trip. "Audrey," my grandmother would say, hugging me goodbye each night, her lavender perfume wrapping around me like a comfort blanket, "you're the best thing that ever happened to us." And in those moments, wrapped in her warm embrace, I could almost forget that I wasn't wanted elsewhere. This pattern continued day after day, year after year. While Victoria prepared for her ambitious career in real estate, I learned to navigate life as an afterthought in my own home. But my grandparents' love was constant, unwavering, and it was in their cozy ranch house that I learned what it meant to be truly valued. One day, my grandfather would tell me as we worked through my science homework at their kitchen table, the afternoon sun casting warm shadows through the lace curtains my grandmother had hung decades ago, "You'll understand that sometimes the best things in life aren't planned." He'd wink at me over his reading glasses, and for a moment, the weight of being unwanted would lift from my small shoulders. With Victoria focused on her struggling real estate career, I thought things might change at home. Maybe my parents would finally see me, the daughter who remained. I couldn't have been more wrong. "Audrey," my mother's voice would reach me through the house's smart speaker system before I could even set down my backpack after school, "the house needs cleaning. Start with the bathrooms." What had once been Victoria's chores now became mine, along with a host of new responsibilities. The washing machine became my constant companion, and I learned all its cycles and settings by heart, the mechanical hum a soundtrack to my teenage years. The housework seemed endless, a never-ending cycle of duties that left me exhausted. "You live here, you need to contribute," my father would say whenever I showed the slightest hesitation, his eyes never leaving his iPad screen. "Your sister always did her part when she lived here." By the time I was 14, I had graduated from cleaning to cooking. It wasn't a gradual transition. One day my mother simply stopped preparing meals. "You're old enough now," she announced one morning over her virtual business meeting. "We expect dinner ready when we get home from work." That first night, I made spaghetti, following a recipe I found online. It was slightly overcooked, but edible. My parents ate in silence, then my father looked up from his phone. "Tomorrow, try something with chicken," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion but an order. My only escape was dreaming about college. Every night after finishing the dishes, I'd retreat to my room and immerse myself in university websites, my laptop screen illuminating my hopes for the future. I'd imagine myself walking across different campuses, far away from the endless chores and cold silences of home, my mind filled with possibilities in the medical technology field that fascinated me. Then, when I was 16, Victoria came home with news that changed everything. She burst through the front door one Sunday afternoon, dragging a tall, well-dressed man behind her. "Mom, Dad," she squealed, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors, "this is Nathan. We're engaged." You'd think someone had just announced they'd won the lottery. My parents literally jumped from their ergonomic office chairs, my mother crying tears of joy while clutching her iPad. My father was already pulling out his phone to call relatives. "We'll pay for everything," my mother declared, hugging Victoria. "Our first daughter's wedding has to be perfect." The wedding preparations consumed our house for months. Every conversation revolved around flowers, venues, and guest lists. Money seemed to flow like water: designer dresses, premium vendors, top-tier everything. My grandparents attended the wedding but seemed uncomfortable with the extravagance. I caught my grandmother frowning at the ice sculpture that probably cost more than a semester of college tuition. Grandfather just shook his head at the champagne fountain, but they kept their thoughts to themselves, though I could read the concern in their eyes. 2 years later, I sat at our dinner table, 3 college acceptance letters spread before me. After years of playing household manager while maintaining straight A's, I'd been accepted to all my top choices, including their prestigious biomedical engineering programs. My heart raced as I told my parents the good news, hope rising in my chest despite years of experience that should have taught me better. "That's nice," my mother said, not looking up from her social media feed, "but we can't pay for it. We spent all our savings on your sister's wedding, even took out a loan for it. There's nothing left for college." "But you paid for Victoria's college," I stammered, my fingers trembling on the acceptance letters. "That was different," my mother replied, finally looking up. "We saw potential in her." The silence at the dinner table was deafening. After my mother's words about potential, I sat there, the acceptance letters suddenly feeling heavy in my hands, as my parents continued scrolling through their phones as if they hadn't just shattered my dreams. "You should get a job," my father said between checking his email notifications. "Save up some money, take out student loans. That's what responsible adults do." I left the table without being excused, something I'd never dared to do before. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called my grandmother. Within minutes, I was walking through their familiar front door, tears streaming down my face. The smell of my grandmother's lavender hand cream and my grandfather's old leather armchair wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. "Oh, sweetheart," my grandmother pulled me into a hug while I told them everything between sobs, my words tumbling out between gasps. My grandfather's face grew stern as he listened, but there was a glimmer in his eyes that I couldn't quite read. When I finished, they exchanged a knowing look, the kind I'd seen them share countless times over years of family dinners and holiday gatherings. "Audrey," my grandfather said, taking my hand in his weathered one, "we've been expecting something like this." "What do you mean?" I asked, wiping my eyes with the tissue my grandmother had pressed into my hand. "We've watched how they've treated you all these years," my grandmother explained, her voice gentle but firm. "How they spent money on Victoria's education, her extravagant wedding. We knew they might do this to you." My grandfather stood up, his joints creaking slightly as he made his way to his study. When he returned, he was holding a leather folder that looked well-worn but carefully maintained. "We've been saving for your education since the day you were born," he said, opening the folder to reveal bank statements and investment documents. You can choose any of those 3 colleges. We've got you covered. Every penny. That night, I went home and packed my things. Not everything, just what I needed: my laptop, some clothes, my cherished medical technology textbooks, and the few photos I had of my grandparents and me. My parents were in the living room, both absorbed in their separate screens, when I told them I was moving in with my grandparents. "Whatever you think is best," my mother said, her eyes never leaving her tablet where she was reviewing Victoria's latest property listings. Was that relief I heard in her voice? The next few weeks were a blur of college preparations. I chose to study biomedical engineering with a focus on financial management, driven by a desire to understand both the human and business aspects of medical technology. Somehow, watching my parents' mismanagement of money while ignoring basic human connections had sparked an interest in doing things the right way. My grandparents helped me with every detail, from filling out financial aid forms to buying supplies for my dorm room. When I finally started classes that fall, it felt like stepping into a new world. The material was challenging but fascinating. Each lecture on medical devices and healthcare economics felt like a step away from my old life and toward something meaningful. My professors noticed my unique perspective, combining technical knowledge with financial insight, and soon I was staying after class to discuss healthcare innovation and market dynamics. For the first time in my life, someone besides my grandparents saw potential in me, real potential. My understanding of both medical technology and financial management seemed to open doors I never knew existed. My second year of college was in full swing when my grandmother called with some interesting news about Victoria. "Your sister's having trouble," she said during one of our weekly video calls, her face pixelated but her concern clear. "Her real estate career isn't taking off like she hoped, and Nathan can't seem to hold down a consulting job. They're constantly asking your parents for money." I wasn't surprised when she told me they were getting it. "Your mother emptied her retirement account last month to help them with rent," my grandmother sighed, adjusting her reading glasses. "They just can't say no to her." A year later, the situation got worse. Victoria and Nathan couldn't make rent anymore, even with our parents' constant financial support. They moved back into my old bedroom, the one I'd spent years keeping spotlessly clean. The irony wasn't lost on me as I saw Victoria's social media posts showing her cozy new home office, carefully angled to hide the peeling wallpaper I remembered. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My professors had helped me land internships at prestigious medical device companies, where I discovered I had a natural talent for understanding both the technical and financial aspects of healthcare innovation. Each challenging project, from analyzing cost-effectiveness of new medical technologies to developing financial strategies for patient access programs, made me more certain I'd chosen the right path. "You have an exceptional ability to balance business acumen with healthcare impact," my supervisor at MedTech Solutions told me during my performance review. "We'd love to have you join our executive training program after graduation." I kept my head down and focused on my studies, barely thinking about my family except during video calls with my grandparents. But when I visited them during my senior year, I knew something was wrong the moment I walked through their door. My grandmother's usual warm smile seemed forced, and my grandfather, usually quick with a joke about his latest gardening project, sat quietly in his familiar armchair. The house felt heavy with unspoken words. "What's wrong?" I asked over dinner, watching them push food around their plates. "And don't tell me it's nothing. I know you both too well." They exchanged a look I'd seen too many times before, the one that meant they were trying to protect me from something. Finally, my grandfather spoke, his voice unusually tired. "Your parents came to see us last week," he said, setting down his fork. "They wanted their inheritance early." What do you mean? I put down my spoon, my stomach churning. They're in trouble with the banks, my grandmother explained, her hands twisting her napkin. Multiple loans, credit card debt. They said they needed $200,000 to avoid bankruptcy. And you gave it to them? I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. My grandfather nodded, looking older than I'd ever seen him. We had to, Audrey. They're still our daughter and son-in-law, despite everything. It was most of your savings. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. After everything they've done? After how they keep enabling Victoria's irresponsible spending? After how they treated me? Sweetheart, my grandmother reached across the table to take my hand, her touch as comforting as ever. We know you're angry, but what's done is done. We'll be fine. But my anger kept building. My parents, who'd never had money for my education, who'd treated me like a live-in maid, had the audacity to demand money from the only people who'd ever truly cared for me, all because they couldn't say no to Victoria and couldn't manage their own finances. The injustice of it burned in my chest. My hard work paid off. After graduation, with glowing recommendations from my professors and impressive internship experiences in medical technology finance, I landed a position as a financial analyst at MedTech Solutions, one of the leading medical device companies in the country. The starting salary was more than I'd ever dreamed of making. I found a modest but modern apartment in a safe neighborhood, nothing fancy, but mine. Every morning, I'd wake up grateful that I didn't have to cook breakfast for anyone but myself. My career flourished as I threw myself into each new challenge, from developing pricing strategies for life-saving devices to creating financial assistance programs for patients in need. My unique combination of healthcare knowledge and financial expertise earned me rapid promotions and performance bonuses that my younger self couldn't have imagined. Within a few years, I had advanced to Director of Financial Operations and had enough saved for a down payment on my own house. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I couldn't help but think of my parents and Victoria, who'd never managed their money well enough to buy property despite their real estate ambitions. Not that they knew about my success, we hadn't spoken in years, though I occasionally saw Victoria's carefully curated social media posts about her thriving real estate business. Then came the call that changed everything. My grandfather had suffered a massive heart attack. By the time I rushed to the hospital, still wearing my business suit from an important board meeting, he was gone. My grandmother, who'd been by his side for over 50 years, seemed to lose her spark after that. Less than 2 months later, she followed him, leaving me truly alone for the first time in my life. I was arranging my grandmother's funeral at the upscale memorial home when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Audrey, do you want some help with the arrangements? I turned to find my mother standing there, looking older and more tired than I remembered, her designer clothes slightly worn at the edges. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, but something in her expression, perhaps genuine grief, made me hesitate. Sure, I heard myself say, surprising us both. That would be nice. Over the next few days, as we planned the service, my parents began to open up. They were struggling, they admitted. Retirement hadn't been kind to them financially. We barely make ends meet, my father confessed one afternoon while we were selecting flowers, his once proud posture now slightly stooped. And with Victoria's twins. Twins? This was news to me, though I shouldn't have been surprised they hadn't told me. Yes, Lucas and Owen, my mother jumped in, pulling out her phone to show me photos. Such beautiful boys, 7 years old now, but they need so much. Victoria and Nathan still can't manage on their own, so we help where we can. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral as I looked at the smiling faces on her screen. Some things never changed. A week after we laid my grandmother to rest, we gathered in a wood-paneled office at Thompson and Associates for the reading of the will. I sat across from my parents, with Victoria and Nathan slouched in chairs beside them, both looking uncomfortable in their slightly outdated business attire. The room smelled of old leather and furniture polish, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The attorney, Mr. Patterson, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and began reading in a measured voice. I expected the usual legal terminology, but what came next made everyone sit up straight. To our beloved granddaughter, Audrey, he read, his voice clear in the hushed room, we leave our house at 1542 Maple Street and the sum of $150,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's perfectly maintained facade cracked as her mouth fell open, and my mother gripped my father's arm so hard her manicured nails left marks on his sleeve. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and continued, and a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter, Diana. He looked at my mother over his glasses. The note reads, Diana, remember that we gave you $200,000 when you needed it most. This is our final decision, and we trust you will respect it as we respected your needs. My mother's face flushed red, then pale. My father stared at the floor, while Victoria and Nathan exchanged worried glances, their financial lifeline suddenly threatened. After the attorney finished and gathered his papers into his leather briefcase, my parents approached me in the parking lot. The polite demeanor they'd shown during the funeral arrangements was gone, replaced by barely concealed desperation. Audrey, honey, my mother began, her voice trembling beneath its practiced smoothness, you have to understand, we always thought we'd inherit the house. We were counting on it. We're struggling. The mortgage, Victoria's family's expenses, we could really use the house, my father added, running his hand through his thinning gray hair. I looked at them both, remembering all the years of neglect, the constant reminders that I wasn't wanted, the refusal to help with my education while they drained their accounts for Victoria. No, I said firmly, adjusting my designer blazer, a symbol of the success I'd achieved without their help. The house is mine. That's what Grandma and Grandpa wanted. They continued pleading, following me to my Tesla Model 3, but I stood firm. Victoria joined in too, her real estate agent persona slipping as she talked about how her boys needed a yard to play in, but I simply got in my car and drove away. A week later, my phone lit up with my mother's contact info. Her voice sounded different when I answered, humbled, perhaps. She was asking me to come over for dinner. Against my better judgment and my executive assistant's carefully managed schedule, I agreed. Pulling up to my childhood home was like stepping back in time, except everything looked shabbier than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the gutters sagged, and the once pristine lawn was patchy and overgrown. Inside, the house was crowded but clean. Lucas and Owen, Victoria's twins, ran circles around the living room while Nathan half-heartedly told them to settle down from behind his laptop. The boys were cute. They had Victoria's carefully maintained appearance and Nathan's unruly curly hair. Audrey, my mother smiled, pulling me into an awkward hug. We made your favorite, pot roast. That's not my favorite, I said automatically, my voice steady. That's Victoria's favorite. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by my father clearing his throat. Well, why don't you tell us what your favorite food is? We'd love to know. And surprisingly, they seemed genuinely interested. Over dinner, they asked about my job at MedTech Solutions, my modern apartment, my hobbies. They actually listened when I talked about my work in healthcare finance and medical technology innovation, though I could tell most of it went over their heads. That dinner led to another, then another. Soon, I was joining them for holidays, bringing educational toys for the twins, even helping the boys with their homework sometimes. When they mentioned the house needed repairs, I found myself offering to help, my financial expertise making me acutely aware of their deteriorating situation. I paid for a new HVAC system, fixed the crumbling foundation, repainted the exterior. Each time I transferred funds, my parents would tear up with gratitude. "You're too good to us," my mother would say, hugging me while standing in their newly renovated kitchen. "We don't deserve this." "You're right," I would think but never say aloud, because despite everything, despite all the years of hurt and neglect, some small part of me still wanted to believe people could change. The years passed, and my career at MedTech Solutions continued to flourish. Each promotion brought new opportunities to improve patient care through innovative financial solutions, and my investment portfolio grew substantially. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents seemed to strengthen. They were getting older, both were over 70 now, and I found myself wanting to do something meaningful for them. "I've been thinking," I said during one of our Sunday dinners, watching my father struggle to climb the stairs, "this house isn't really suitable for you anymore. I want to buy you a new house, something single-story, with wider doorways and better accessibility, but still with a nice garden. Something that would be comfortable for your retirement years." Their reaction surprised me, actual tears of joy, not the manufactured emotion I'd grown accustomed to seeing from them. We spent the next few weeks house hunting together and finally found the perfect place, a beautiful ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood, designed for aging in place with all the modern amenities. After transferring a significant portion of my savings, my parents couldn't stop talking about how excited they were. "We need to have a proper housewarming party," my father declared, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Let us arrange everything. It's the least we can do." "That would be lovely," I agreed, planning to present them with the deed during the celebration. "Just let me know when." Weeks passed. Between managing major healthcare financing projects and developing new patient assistance programs, I was busy with work, but I kept expecting an invitation. When nothing came, I started asking about the date. "Oh, we're still planning," my mother would say during our video calls. "You know how these things take time. We want it to be perfect." "We'll let you know soon," my father would add, his face slightly pixelated on my screen. Something about their vague responses triggered a familiar feeling of unease. One evening, after another deflecting call from my mother, I found myself opening Instagram, where I wasn't connected with Victoria. I hadn't looked at her profile in years, having muted all family social media long ago. There it was, posted just hours ago with her signature real estate agent polish, so excited for Mom and Dad's amazing housewarming party this Saturday. "The house is absolutely gorgeous. Can't wait to celebrate with everyone. #new home, #family celebration, #luxury living." The post had dozens of comments from relatives and friends, all confirming their attendance. Her story showed decorations being set up, catering being arranged. This wasn't a last-minute gathering, this had been planned for weeks. My hand shaking slightly, I called my mother, years of executive presentations helping me keep my voice steady. "Hi, Mom," I maintained a casual tone. "Just checking in about the housewarming party. Have you set a date yet?" "Oh, honey, not yet," she replied smoothly, the lie flowing effortlessly. "Probably in a couple of weeks. We're still working out the details. We want everyone to be able to come." Everyone, except me, apparently. The irony of being excluded from a celebration of a house I had bought wasn't lost on me. That Saturday, I parked my Tesla a block away from the house I had purchased. Music and laughter drifted through the evening air. Through the large energy-efficient windows I'd specifically chosen for them, I could see dozens of people milling about, relatives I recognized, friends of my parents, Victoria's real estate network. The front door was unlocked, of course it was. They were expecting everyone except the person who actually owned the house. I slipped in quietly in my designer business suit, following the sound of my father's voice to the living room. And after all these years of hard work, we finally did it, he was saying to a group of attentive listeners, standing under the new LED recessed lighting I'd had installed. Bought our dream home. Don't forget about Victoria, my mother added proudly, gesturing with her wine glass. She helped so much with the down payment. Such a wonderful daughter, always taking care of her parents. Someone murmured sympathetically, and my mother nodded. You know, our younger daughter hasn't helped us at all, she said pointedly, adjusting her new smart home tablet. Probably too busy with her medical technology career to care about family. I stood in the doorway, heat rising to my face as I watched this performance. Victoria beamed beside them, her 7-year-old twins running between the guests in the space I'd carefully designed for aging accessibility. Here they were, celebrating in the house I bought with my hard-earned success in the very career they'd dismissed. Actually, I said loudly, making everyone jump, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed in countless boardroom presentations, I think you've got that backwards. The color drained from my parents' faces. Guests turned to stare at me, whispers rippling through the crowd like a wave. Audrey, my father recovered first, his smile tight. What a surprise! I'm sure it is, I replied, stepping into the room, my heels clicking against the premium flooring I'd selected, especially since you forgot to invite me to the housewarming party for the house I bought. Dead silence fell over the room. Nathan suddenly became very interested in his worn loafers, while Victoria's perfectly maintained real estate agent smile faltered. Well, my mother's voice had an edge to it, her wine glass trembling slightly, what's done is done. You bought it, yes, but it's ours now. You can't expect eternal gratitude. That's right, my father added, gaining confidence as he stood next to their new smart home control panel. And frankly, you're not welcome here. This is a family gathering, and Victoria and her family will be living here too, my mother announced, her voice rising. They've already sold their house. It's all arranged. I couldn't help but laugh, a cold, harsh sound that echoed off the newly painted walls. Reaching into my Prada briefcase, I pulled out a folder containing documents I'd prepared with the same meticulous attention I gave to my medical technology contracts. You seem to be confused about something, I said, opening the folder to reveal the deed and ownership papers. This house belongs to me. I never signed it over to you. I was planning to give it to you tonight, at what I thought would be a proper housewarming party. My mother's face went from pale to ashen. My father started to sputter, his hand gripping the marble countertop I'd specially ordered. Victoria's carefully crafted professional demeanor crumbled completely. And now I turned to address the stunned guests, using the same commanding tone I used in corporate presentations. Now, I'd like everyone to leave. This is my house, and the party's over. You can't do this, my mother's voice rose to a shriek, her perfect hostess facade shattering. We're your parents. No, I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of years of executive decision-making. You're just the people who gave birth to me. My real parents, my grandparents, taught me that family means more than blood. They also taught me about financial responsibility, which is why I own this house, and you don't. They left in tears, my parents, Victoria, Nathan, the twins, and all their guests. I watched from the front porch as they drove away in their aging luxury cars, one by one, until the street was empty except for my Tesla parked around the corner. After a few weeks, I learned they'd used the money from selling their old house to rent a small apartment. Victoria, Nathan, and the twins moved in with them. They tried calling me, sending emails, reaching out through LinkedIn, but I blocked their numbers, their emails, their social media accounts. The house? I sold it a month later and donated the proceeds to a patient assistance program at MedTech Solutions, helping families afford life-saving medical devices. Someday I'll have my own children, and I promised myself they'll never have to earn my love or compete for my attention. Unlike my parents, I'll love my children equally and unconditionally, the way my grandparents loved